Welcome to RenMac Off Script. We're going to discuss markets, economics, policy, history, and life. It's the 16th of February, 2024. I'm Jeff DeGraff.
I'm Neil Dutta.
And I'm Steve Pavlik.
As a reminder, all the charts that we reference are posted to our Twitter account at RenMac LLC. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, leave a review. And if you're not an institutional client, but you'd like more insight, join us at RenMacAccess.com. That's RenMacAccess.com. It's a site that we provided for RIAs and accredited investors to get some insights into the world as we see it. We're going to hit on inflation this week. There's a lot going on in Washington, particularly from the legal side on both sides, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about the momentum market, which, just as a teaser, actually is not yet a momentum market, so we'll hit on that. But Neil, let's go to you with the inflation stuff. Obviously, that spooked markets on Tuesday. Markets have come back from that, but the data's been a little wonky at best. Kind of following up from the employment data that we had a couple weeks ago, or last week, I guess it was. What's your take on this inflation stuff? Is it a concern? Has it changed the Fed at all? Where are we on that?
Well, I think it changes the markets a little bit more than it changes the Fed. Whenever you get big reactions to one data point, it usually suggests that a lot of people were heavily invested in one side of the trade, right? So in this case, the soft landing view.
We actually have something technically that we look at called a volatility alert for exactly that reason. So,
right. But it has been a bit of a roller coaster. Frankly, in the front end. You had a big spike in yields one day, you came in a little bit, and now after this morning's producer price index report, which obviously has some implications for core PCE, also coming in firm, not as firm as CPI, but still firm, it does kind of shake the confidence a little bit, in the inflation path. Now, whenever you get data points like this, it's just important to kind of go back to first principles, right? And number one, it's coming off of a period of generally better than expected inflation. We've had 6 or 7 months where core inflation's been running below 2%. That's number one. Number two, what ultimately drives inflation? It's compensation, it's inflation, and productivity, right? It's the dynamics between those two things. And compensation growth is running about 3.5%, and productivity appears to be recovering to a trend-like pace of around 1.5%. So that indicates that the inflationary impulse out of the labor market is broadly consistent with the Fed's longer-run objective of 2% inflation. And then finally, business inflation expectations, consumer inflation expectations are all moderating. It's a standard feature of most of the workforce models that inflation expectations matter because that's what happens to realized inflation, right? So as I say, I think we can be back here like in April talking about a soft March PCE number, inflation number, and it could be that May the probabilities are probably down to like maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 4 right now, and we could be talking about maybe it's 60% by then. So I wouldn't torpedo like the May rate cut call just yet, because I do think there's a continued disinflation process in train. But I think the broader story is, what are we really talking about here at the end of the day? We're talking about how much the economy is growing and when the Fed's going to cut. Like that's, we're not talking about anything other than that. And I think it's just important to keep that in the back of your mind. So the markets will do what they do on any given day, but generally speaking, I would argue that that backdrop is a reasonably healthy one for corporate earnings, which in turn is a reasonably healthy one for risk appetite.
So, part of this is the market ends up doing the Fed's bidding, right? You take long ends and you boost them by 50 basis points with the, not necessarily the expectation that rates are going higher, but with the expectation that short rates will be at this level for longer. That by itself ends up helping to slow things out for the longer duration, housing, etc. One of the things that I was going to ask you about, because we've seen it here, and I don't like drawing, a linear relationship or a linear line between two data points, but we do know that the sub-industry group of air freight and logistics has a pretty good, positive, statistically meaningful correlation to forward industrial production. And those things have been obliterated here recently. FedEx, UPS, even some of the smaller guys. So it's not just we do it at equal weight so that we don't get skewed by any one particularly large or mega cap name. Any sense as to maybe there's a softer data print coming out in industrial production that might catch us off guard?
I mean, we just had one for January. Now, a lot of that, I mean, but if you look at the economic data more broadly, I think basically the theme is that January we kind of hit a dead spot in the economy. Now, I think that that's partially related to poor weather conditions. I mean, we know from the jobs number that was released that roughly 600,000 people that have a job weren't at work due to bad weather. And that was the highest in a long time. So I think weather did play a role in depressing some of the hard pieces of economic data in January, and manufacturing industrial production is included among them. But what we know about February, generally speaking, has been a little bit better, right? Survey measures of business activity have been good, whether that's the NAHB housing market index, whether that's the regional PMIs that were released. Those were generally better than expected for February. So I think, when I put it all together, I mean, you're basically still talking about an economy that's growing at about 2 to 2.5%. And that's higher than where the consensus is for the year, and certainly where it is for the quarter. So, we'll see. I mean, I like looking at market signals too, but I think that there's a reasonably good case fundamentally to talk about why manufacturing production should pick up. It primarily has to do with inventories.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not seeing it in the other names, right? We don't see it in the heavy machinery and the construction machinery and some of these other areas in the market. And even within transports, I mean, rails look great. Rails are breaking out. Many of the truckers look good and continue. But it's just that one kind of nit that is picking at us. And it might be industry specific. So we'll see. Steve Pavlik, the circus is closed next week for President's Day, but I know that there are some pressing issues. So when the circus reopens, what's on the agenda?
Well, the circus, I believe, is supposed to come back February 28th. Now, keep in mind, we do have leap year, so we are going to have an extra day, but we're going to run up to that Friday, March 1st, which is the first of two government funding deadlines for the 12 bills set to expire then. So I think that's going to be the immediate focus. And then the following week's going to be very busy. You're going to have the March 5th Super Tuesday contest. The government is open. I assume Biden will show up, give a State of the Union address on March 7th. And then you have the second government funding deadline on March 8th. And if you notice, one of the things that I've left out here is the supplemental that the Senate passed, $95 billion, that did not include any security border provisions. You have House Speaker Mike Johnson sort of dithering as to how he's going to respond. But some have suggested that maybe they could attach the security supplemental. I don't know that that's really practical, and he does that and keep his job. So,
Nobody likes a ditherer, just for the
no,
record.
no,
Nobody likes a ditherer.
that's an understatement right now amongst the House Republican Conference. So I don't really see that supplemental getting at least considered for a while. The other thing to keep in mind too, we've talked a lot about this 78 billion fiscal stimulus, and now that all this attention is focused on these more pressing concerns, I'm not sure whether that can hitch a ride moving forward, given it's still sort of stuck there in the Senate either. So TikTok. Speaking of TikTok, actually, Joe Biden's campaign said that they would now be advertising on TikTok. So anybody who was see whether or not that would a ban would take place, probably not till after 2024. Just wanted to flag that as well.
Appealing to younger voters, UFO conspiracy theorists, and Tucker Carlson fans, I think, right? Is that the combination there on TikTok?
I mean, some people may be one and the same, but that tends to be the target market there.
Neil, you're on mute. What's going on? That's like that was such a softball for you to come out with a Tucker Carlson. Yeah.
Has he gotten back from the grocery stores in Moscow yet? I mean, look, I mean, full disclosure, there are some things that he says that I agree with, and there are plenty of things he says that I don't agree with. But but I will tell you, I have been to Moscow. Okay. I've been there. And
as a detainee or as a visitor?
No, I went to visit. I mean, this was back in I think I went in 2012 because we had like a boys trip, and we went to go see the UEFA soccer thing, and it was hosted in Ukraine and Poland, and so we went to Moscow, St. Petersburg before going to Kiev and all that, and yeah, I mean, wasn't impressed. I mean, that's my view. I mean, wasn't impressed. I mean, the only people that can afford anything there are rich tourists and oligarchs. Keep in mind, everybody, while he waxes poetic about the the grocery stores in Moscow, keep in mind that the average Russian spends about 60% of their income on food. I don't think most of the people listening or in this country spend nearly that much on their food budget. So, and the other thing I thought was funny is
Does that
that,
include the vodka, or is that
yeah,
separate?
right,
Is it line
exactly.
item?
The other thing I found hysterical is that, so I did like a walking tour. So people talk about how great the architecture is in Moscow, right? Like you have these buildings called I think they're called the Stalin Sisters, or I mean, they're all like very classic Russian looking buildings. I mean, they're literally all over Eastern Europe. I mean, you have some in Moscow, I think you have one in Poland also. I mean, it's a very distinct type of architecture. The reason they have that is because they were too stupid to be able to actually build skyscrapers like America. Fact. Stalin wanted to build really tall buildings because we were in the Cold War and all the rest of it. He couldn't do it, so he had to build them that way.
There you go.
All I'm going to say is, look,
that's not all you're going to say.
Anybody that thinks in their right mind that like America doesn't rule, at least relative to, to quote a former president, countries, I just think that, seek help.
There goes our PG rating. Well, while you're on momentum, let's talk about momentum, because momentum in the markets, I'm hearing this a lot, and I want to just clear this up in terms of the way that we think about it. A momentum market, right? So people kind of default. This is one of those loose terms that gets thrown out there. Frankly, I think that term gets thrown out there as sour grapes. I'm not performing, and I'm not performing because I don't participate in momentum. Only price chasers and speculators play in momentum markets. So let's define what a momentum market is. And when we go through and look at it, something that is quantifiable and works through time is we just simply look at the price performance of the 20% highest relative price names in terms of relative performance, and we compare that to the bottom 20%. So it's a spread, and we measure that spread on a yearly basis. We measure that spread on a quarterly basis, and right now on a quarterly basis, so that would be the most sensitive. High momentum names are outperforming low momentum names on a historical percentile of about 70 in the 79th percentile. What does that mean? It means that 21% of the time, that spread has been larger through time. If you're going to be in a momentum market, one that's dangerous, we expect that spread to be in the 90th percentile. So while I think there's some momentum to this market, to call it a pure momentum market is, again, I think more sour grapes than actual fact. Now, when you're in the 90th percentile, that's the point. Look, and we're unapologetic trend followers and momentum players. Why? Because it historically works. But we know also that when we're in that 90th percentile, particularly as other factors start to percolate at some type of extreme, we know that the chances of momentum or trend working start to diminish pretty readily. And that's where the consensus call becomes important, right? Because whatever represents momentum, whether it's AI, whether it's uber defensive names, whether it's interest rate sensitivity, whatever that case may be, that's the narrative that represents those momentum names, we know at that point that the consensus is probably over their skis and the marginal buyer has already been sucked in. So I just don't look at this market in the 79th percentile as being a dangerous momentum market. Is there momentum? Yes. Is momentum working? Yes. That's why we're in the 79th percentile. But is it a market that by itself is extraordinarily dangerous? It's not. And what I think can happen, because we're just starting to see this with some of the sentiment flows, they're starting to get a little aggressive, not literally so. But I think also what we saw this week was that snapback from the Tuesday weakness was part of this FOMO fear. And I think the danger is that by believing it's a momentum market right here, when it's not in our work, is you end up being sucked in when it is in fact a momentum market, right? When you can't take it anymore and you have to print on NVIDIA, when you have to print on Microsoft, et cetera. So the momentum market, if you want to call it that, that's fine, but make sure you quantify it, understand what it is historically. We do the work for you. We're in the 79th percentile. We will alert clients when we get into that 90th percentile. So keep an eye on that. And if you want more, of course, go to renmacaccess.com because we can do it there. Bond yields. Neil, do you think bond yields where they are here? Do you think bonds are a buy up here? Do you think this is a noise amongst the signal and this is the opportunity? Because I will tell you, technically, when we look at Europe, when we look even at the US, these look like top formations in yields. And so what you're looking for is a right shoulder in the technical parlance that gives you this kind of anemic rally that goes up and then stalls out, usually right below a declining moving average. And that's your best opportunity to be a short seller, in this case for yields. What do you think?
Well, I think the upward movement in yields recently has been driven primarily on days of higher than expected inflation. My sense is that inflation is still on a moderating path. So, and the Fed will be cutting. And so I think yields will probably be lower 6 months from now than they are at the moment. So I think, 2-year yields at 4.7, to me, that's a buy. So, I think this is just presenting investors with an opportunity to sort of go long the front end of the yield curve.
Couldn't agree more. From a pure technical standpoint, that absolutely aligns. Steve, real quick, speaking of Putin seemed to endorse Joe Biden.
Is there a difference?
Yeah. Right. We need shirtless horseback. We need the photo. That's what I should have had. Is there? You believe it's a little bit of a holy grail. You thought my poison was your poison, that whole scene. You think there's some gamesmanship going on. Explain yourself, Steve Pavlik.
With respect to Putin endorsing Biden?
Yes.
I think he's doing that because my guess is Putin probably prefers Trump. He knows if he endorses Trump, that's not going to help him. So it gives political cover to Trump. Trump was taking credit for Biden's endorsement or the Biden endorsement last night, saying this is a good thing because Putin respects me because I'm more difficult to deal with. I'm a smarter guy. So, I mean, Trump's going to always try to spin whatever it is to his benefit. But again, I'm not familiar with the inner workings of Putin's mind. But if I had to speculate, which is what you're asking me to do, I think that was why he endorsed Biden.
So you're also, while you're in the speculation camp, we've got some election blowback. It's all legal, which is unbelievable. But I thought the interesting thing was this Hunter Biden story that seems to be emerging, where the credibility of I think it was the witness, right, is now being called into question. I mean, are we going to get to the point where there just ends up being so much noise that people don't care? I mean, it's going to happen to me, I can tell you.
I mean, maybe we're already there.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, for those who aren't familiar with it, this was the key witness for the House Republican impeachment push against Joe Biden with respect to the Ukrainian company Burisma. And you had David Weiss, who is the special counsel in California, bringing the case, who Republicans aren't candidly that friend of. I know he's a Republican in Delaware, but he was also the one that engineered the quote unquote sweetheart deal to Hunter Biden, now sort of bringing charges against this witness, trying to discredit that portion of the impeachment. It still doesn't account for the Chinese money that's coming in. So my guess is Republicans will still, decide to push forward with that. But I think to your point, Jeff, that's sort of the idea here. It's just to sort of create this counter programming, for people that just sort of, view both people as between Biden and Trump, canceling each other out here. And clearly that's something that I think the Biden folks want to avoid.
Yeah, you wonder if they both cancel each other out, who's left with the upper hand. I would think it's Trump, but I'm not sure. If you haven't seen it, I would say that the Jon Stewart bit on Biden and the her release last week is worth it, and I believe that is in fact on TikTok. So Jon Stewart, Joe Biden certainly is entertaining to say the least.
What,
And
did you want to give him the gist of what he said?
I think it reflects my exactly my thinking on the whole thing. We'll let people go to it. Joe Biden and Jon Stewart. Well, in terms of the overall markets, 4,800 is support. 4,600 is what we would call strategic support, something that we think is still within the context of the uptrend. Keep in mind, we have seen or started to see the breakouts, the absolute breakouts, not relative yet, but the absolute breakouts in some of these healthcare names. Remember, we started 2024 with the notion that healthcare was our number one contrarian pick. Those are continuing to do well here. Healthcare on the breakout. We had the pharma ETF breaking out and very close to seeing the breakout in some of these biotechs as well. So last week, a big week for a lot of the life science tool names, which also looked very, very good. So staying with that and adding to it here. Neil, what's on the docket this coming holiday week?
I'm going on a Disney cruise. Wish me luck. So, there's that. And we have the PMIs coming out, the S&P global version of those, so preliminary February data points. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll also be keeping an eye on inflation break-evens. I mean, they've been kind of quietly going up, maybe a little bit of a reaction to the data that's been coming in. But at any rate, I mean, those are sort of the two things I'm keeping an eye on. Other than that, it's relatively quiet. We will get the FOMC minutes for the January 31st rates decision, and we'll see. I mean, the obviously Powell's press conference, following that meeting, basically poo-pooed a lot of the March rate cut bets. So we'll see what the minutes, if they shed any additional light on that.
Behind the scenes, yeah, the break-even rates that are important for the S&P are about 225, 2.25. So watch those because it does start to work historically against equities. Is this an all-you-can-drink Disney cruise, or is this a
funny story? So I, inquiring about that myself, I called up Disney and I was like, after I booked it, because it's a very pricey thing, but this is sort of like a whole family trip. My parents are coming, my mother-in-law and all that. So I call up Disney and I was like, is there a all-inclusive option? And I just felt so seen by the response. She's like, we're not that kind of cruise, sir.
You should have said this is a kid's cruise. That means you're absolutely that kind of cruise. Are you kidding me? Man overboard. Give me 48 hours on that thing and I'd be swimming for sure. All right. Well, join us again next week. We'll be 1 week older, 1 week wiser. Maybe Neil will be joining us from the cruise. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter. If you like what we're hearing, give us a review. And of course, you can go to renmacaccess.com for greater insight, more detail. We will not have a Monday morning macro meeting this Monday because, hey, it's a holiday. And look, we just don't make our employees work on national holidays. I think that is probably actually against the law, but it's just, against my conscience anyway. Until then, I'm Jeff DeGraff.
I'm Neil Detta.
And I'm Steve Pavlik.
We'll see you.